Let's jump right into it. Today, we're diving into the mystery in your wardrobe. And to kick things off, I want you to think about a completely mundane decision that you made effortlessly this morning, getting dressed.
You probably just stood in front of your closet or maybe reached into a drawer, and within seconds, you made a choice. Now, if I were to ask you, hey, why did you get dressed this morning? You'd probably just shrug, right? You might say, well, I grabbed whatever was closest, or I checked the weather and threw on a jacket. It's an automatic routine. But the actual evolutionary reason that you, and literally every other human being on Earth, cover yourselves, well, it goes so much deeper. In fact, the true evolutionary reason we cover up, it's going to completely change how you view fashion, language, and honestly, humanity itself. Ask almost anyone why our ancestors started making clothes, and they'll usually give you one of three obvious answers: modesty, protection, or warmth. Like, oh, we needed to stay warm in the cold, or we needed to protect our skin from the elements, and, basic modesty. But here is the crazy part. Every single one of those assumptions is completely false. Seriously, they are not the real reason we started covering ourselves. Not at all. To understand why, we've got to look at the hard evidence. The hard archaeological timeline actually totally shatters the whole warmth myth. Anatomically modern humans appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. But when we look at the archaeological record, tools for making clothes, things like bone needles and hide scraping tools, they only show up around 120,000 years ago. And most textile historians agree that the widespread adoption of clothing didn't even happen until about 75,000 years ago. So what does that mean? It means that for the entire first half of human existence, we were completely naked, just living under the hot African sun, dealing with chilly nights, entirely without clothes. Warmth only really mattered much, much later when we actually started migrating to colder climates. Okay, so you might be wondering, what about protection then? Thorns, rocks, insect bites? That makes sense. Well, there's a pretty brilliant historical paradox that totally debunks the protection theory. Think about it. If early humans were putting on animal skins just to protect themselves from physical damage, they would have started by covering the parts of their bodies that actually took the most damage, their hands and their feet. But instead, the earliest clothing in almost every single culture covered the torso and the groin first, literally the areas least exposed to environmental damage. That's not a purely practical choice. It points us towards something else entirely. Fast forward to 2003, when a fascinating genetics study gave us a completely unexpected biological clue. These scientists didn't look at old fabric. They looked at lice. Specifically, the evolutionary split between head lice and body lice. See, head lice live in human hair, but body lice live exclusively in clothing. Body lice literally cannot survive without fabric. So scientists realized that if they could trace exactly when these two species of lice split from each other, they would figure out exactly when humans started wearing clothes consistently enough for a whole new species of parasite to evolve and depend on it. Mind-blowing, right? And the answer they found? 170,000 years ago. That right there is the oldest, hardest biological timestamp we have for when humans started wearing clothes consistently. It wasn't a bone needle, it wasn't a stone tool, it was a parasite. But as incredibly fascinating as this is, it really only tells us when the behavior was already established. It still doesn't tell us why we started doing it in the very first place. To find the real origin, we have to go deeper than fabric, deeper than needles, and yep, deeper than lice. To solve the big why, we need to shift our detective story from biology over to psychology. Back in 2009, an archaeologist named Gilligan published this incredibly detailed analysis about clothing and human cognition, and he introduced a real game changer of an argument. He proposed that clothing was actually never a practical invention. Instead, it was a symbolic one. Choosing to cover the body reflects a profoundly deep kind of thinking that firmly sets human beings apart from literally every other animal on the planet. Let's break down the massive cognitive leap it actually takes to create clothes. First, you have to imagine a future version of yourself. Then, you look at an animal hide and plan how to turn it into something useful for that future. And finally, you execute the design. I mean, a chimpanzee doesn't look at a leaf and think about how it might look or be useful tomorrow, but early humans did. This requires memory and future planning. The very moment we started clothing our bodies, we were proving for the very first time that we could think ahead. Clothing is quite literally one of the earliest physical artifacts of the modern human mind. So the crucial point here is this massive paradigm shift. Underneath that forward planning is something evolutionary biologists rarely talk about, and that is shame. Now hold on, we aren't talking about shame in the religious or moral sense. Early humans put on clothes because of a huge neurological milestone known as neurological shame. Basically, this is the uniquely human awareness of being perceived.
It's that sudden, profound realization that your body is an object being observed and evaluated by the other people around you. This whole concept stems from what psychologists call theory of mind. It's the psychological ability to mentally step outside of yourself and imagine what you look like through someone else's eyes. Animals like dogs and crows, they completely lack this ability. Even chimpanzees barely show traces of it. But once human beings unlocked this cognitive superpower, everything shifted. Survival was no longer just about running away from predators, it became intrinsically tied to how we were perceived by the rest of our group. Suddenly we're asking, what am I signaling to others? How do I look?
And you can see proof of this everywhere, completely independent of the weather. Just look at cultures in super hot climates, like parts of the Amazon or the Pacific Islands. Warmth is obviously not an issue there, yet people still intensely decorate themselves with beads, paint, feathers, simple fibers, and tattoos. Why? Because once we developed that theory of mind, the human body was never just a body again. It became an image that needed to be controlled, curated, and presented to the world.
As human social groups grew and became more complex, clothing evolved into an absolutely vital piece of social technology. Before you even spoke a single word to someone, their clothing did all the talking for them. It shaped their identity, it signaled group membership, it indicated whether they were a threat or an ally, and it established exactly where they stood in the hierarchy. Clothing essentially became one of our absolute oldest forms of instant communication and language.
Let's bring this directly back to you for a second. Have you ever shown up to a party or an event and felt that sudden sinking anxiety because you realized you were drastically overdressed or maybe horribly underdressed? You get that feeling like everyone in the room is staring right at you, right? Well, it turns out that anxiety isn't just modern social awkwardness. That is an ancient instinct firing off in your brain. Your brain is running a deeply social calculation, suddenly hyper-aware that the version of yourself you're projecting into the world just doesn't match what the situation requires. Think back to that massive number for a second, 170,000 years. Negotiating who you want to be seen as and what the moment demands of you, that's a social calculation your ancestors started running around the fire way back then. I mean, we solved the basics of cold survival and physical protection a very, very long time ago. But our clothing only became more detailed and intentional because it was never really about the body. It was always about the mind, and that deep, fundamental part of us that knows we are being watched. Which leaves us with this final thought. Tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up and get dressed, just like always. You might think you're just absent-mindedly picking fabric out of a drawer, but I challenge you to recognize that beneath that mundane morning routine lies a deeply profound and ancient human instinct. You aren't just putting on clothes. You are constructing a version of yourself to project into the world. So as you stand in front of your wardrobe tomorrow, who are you choosing to be seen as?